A cocky Navy SEAL targets what he thinks is just another old martial arts fraud at a veterans charity gala, publicly mocking the quiet benefactor who's been writing huge checks all evening. The arrogant warrior and his documentary crew laugh as they humiliate the elderly man, challenging him to prove he's not just another Hollywood wannabe stealing valor from real soldiers. But this soft-spoken stranger in the simple black suit isn't just any donor. This is Steven Seagal himself. The SEAL has no idea he just challenged a CIA legend who spent decades perfecting the deadliest martial art on Earth. While the young hotshot flexes for the cameras and bets $50,000 on lasting 30 seconds, the aikido master accepts with terrifying calm. The other veterans recognize their hero and step back, knowing brutal justice is about to unfold. The SEAL's teammates keep filming, thinking they're capturing another easy victory, but they're actually recording their leader's most humiliating defeat. What happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object in front of 300 witnesses? Will the Navy SEAL survive learning why some legends are born from real violence? What happened next would shatter the warrior's ego for the rest of his military career. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Grand Palms Hotel ballroom buzzed with the refined energy of Phoenix's annual Veterans Charity Gala. 300 souls gathered under crystal chandeliers to honor those who had served. Among the sea of dress uniforms and evening gowns, a man in his early 70s moved like smoke through water, present but unnoticed, purposeful yet unhurried. Steven Seagal wore a simple black suit and bolo tie, his silver-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail that had defied fashion trends for decades. The weathered Mont Blanc pen in his scarred hands told stories of violence transformed into compassion as he approached each charity table with quiet reverence. Vietnam Veterans Support, he murmured to the elderly coordinator, writing a check for $15,000 with the fluid precision of a master calligrapher. The woman's eyes widened, but he had already moved on, leaving only the faint scent of sage and the rustle of silk-lined jacket to the wounded warrior housing table. Another check, $25,000. The PTSD counseling services received $30,000, written with the same economical movements that had once delivered death in shadowed corners of the world. Hotel staff whispered reverently as Mr. S passed their mystery benefactor who had funded these events for 5 years without seeking recognition or photographers. His dark eyes missed nothing. The nervous energy of newly returned soldiers, the hollow stare of those still fighting wars that had ended decades ago, the careful positioning of exits and potential threats. Margaret Kowalski, the gala's organizer, and a Vietnam-era Army nurse, watched him with the knowing gaze of someone who had seen too much healing and too much hurt. Her weathered hands straightened the purple heart lapel pin on her navy dress as she approached. "Another generous evening," she said softly, accepting his check for the general fund. "But tonight feels different somehow." Seagal's response was barely audible above the quartet's gentle jazz. "Sometimes the past demands payment." Margaret studied his profile, the sharp cheekbones that camera angles had made famous, the hands that moved with lethal grace even in gestures of charity. "You're saying goodbye, aren't you?" He declined the photographer's request with a subtle shake of his head, then positioned himself near the bar with tactical awareness disguised as casual interest. The club soda with lime arrived without ordering, another testament to the staff's careful attention to their most valued guest. The room's energy shifted subtly as voices grew louder near the entrance. Margaret felt it too, the electricity that preceded storms, the tension that made old soldiers check their six. "He's been our biggest anonymous donor for 5 years," she murmured to her assistant Beverly. "But tonight feels like he's saying goodbye." The ballroom doors burst open with the theatrical timing of a Hollywood entrance, but this was pure military precision masquerading as civilian casualness. Lieutenant Commander Brett "Razor" Kellerman strode in like he owned not just the room, but the entire concept of heroism itself. At-32, Kellerman was everything Hollywood casting directors dreamed of, 6'3" of sculpted muscle, wrapped in dress blues that showcased every ribbon, every medal, every symbol of American military excellence. His blonde hair caught the chandelier light like spun gold, and his blue eyes swept the room with the predatory confidence of an apex predator entering new territory. His entourage followed like pilot fish around a shark. Marcus Webb and Tony Rodriguez, fellow SEALs whose discomfort with their leader's celebrity was hidden behind professional stoicism. Janet Pierce, the publicist whose job was transforming warriors into media darlings, clutched her phone like a lifeline to relevance. And Linda Vasquez, the documentary filmmaker whose camera operator Danny captured every manufactured moment of spontaneous heroism. Commander Kellerman. The voices rose from the crowd like a tide. Cell phones emerged, transforming the charity gala into an impromptu meet and greet. Kellerman's smile was pure American confidence, straight teeth, strong jaw, the kind of grin that sold recruitment posters and political campaigns. Just got back from Yemen, he announced to the growing circle, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to being interviewed. Can't talk specifics, but let's just say freedom isn't free, and somebody's got to pay the bill. The crowd ate it up. Here was their vision of American strength: young, bold, uncompromising. The kind of warrior who didn't hide behind shadows or operate in moral gray areas. Everything was black and white in Kellerman's world, and he was always wearing the white hat. Webb and Rodriguez exchanged glances that spoke volumes about deployments spent watching their commander's ego inflate with each successful mission, each medal ceremony, each magazine interview. They remembered the Brett Kellerman who had earned his trident through blood and sacrifice before the cameras and handlers transformed him into a brand. Linda Vasquez adjusted her camera angle, capturing the interplay between hero and worshippers. Her documentary, The Modern Warrior, was meant to showcase military excellence in the contemporary age. What she was actually documenting was the careful construction of American mythology, one soundbite at a time. Real warriors don't need Hollywood, Kellerman declared, his voice rising above the gentle jazz quartet. We prove ourselves where it matters, in the dirt, under fire, when the chips are down and there's nowhere to run. His gaze swept the room and settled on the quiet figure at the bar, the man in the simple black suit who hadn't turned to watch the show. That Kellerman's approach to the bar carried all the subtle menace of a predator investigating potential prey. His entourage followed at a respectful distance, cameras rolling, crowd murmuring with anticipation of another Kellerman moment for social media immortality. Hey, can you get me a whiskey neat? Kellerman addressed the quiet figure without looking at his face, the casual dismissal of someone accustomed to being served by lesser mortals. The bartender, a professional who had witnessed 5 years of these galas, cleared his throat diplomatically. Sir, that's actually one of our honored guests. Kellerman's blue eyes finally focused on the older man, taking in the simple attire, the unassuming posture, the weathered hands wrapped around a club soda. No flash, no ceremony, no obvious markers of importance. In Kellerman's binary world of military hierarchy and media relevance, this man registered as a non-entity. My mistake, Kellerman said, though his tone suggested the opposite. The apology carried the weight of someone who had never actually been wrong about anything that mattered. Margaret Kowalski materialized between them like a diplomatic shield, her nurse's instincts recognizing the signs of impending trauma. Commander Kellerman, I'd like you to meet one of our most generous supporters. He's contributed over $200,000 to veteran causes over the years. The number should have impressed. Instead, Kellerman's expression shifted to something resembling pity mixed with suspicion. Charitable giving was fine, admirable even, but it wasn't service. It wasn't sacrifice. It wasn't earned. That's very generous, Kellerman said, extending his hand with military precision. What unit were you with, sport? The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Around them, conversations quieted as other veterans recognized the challenge being issued. This wasn't small talk. This was an interrogation disguised as courtesy. Various assignments. Came the quiet reply as scarred hands accepted the handshake. CIA, mostly advisory roles. Kellerman's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. CIA, huh? Let me guess. Black Ops, classified missions, the whole 9 yards. His voice carried just enough volume to draw attention from nearby tables. Funny how many CIA guys show up at these things. Almost like Hollywood made it sound cooler than it actually was. The insult landed with surgical precision, designed to provoke exactly the kind of reaction that would justify what came next. But instead of anger or wounded pride, there was only stillness. The kind of profound calm that made experienced soldiers check their weapons and scan for exits. Margaret's warning came too late. Brett, please don't. I'm just tired of frauds taking credit for real warriors' sacrifices, Kellerman continued, his voice rising to address the growing audience. We've got guys dying overseas while wannabe operators play dress-up at charity events. The ballroom's elegant atmosphere transformed into something primal as Kellerman found his rhythm, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. The jazz quartet had stopped playing, their instruments lowering like weapons at ceasefire. You know what I see everywhere these days? Kellerman announced to the growing crowd, his gesture encompassing not just the quiet man at the bar, but the entire concept of civilian military worship. Hollywood martial artists claiming they're some kind of secret warriors. Guys who learned their combat skills from stunt coordinators, not drill sergeants. Linda Vasquez's camera captured every moment, the lens hungry for conflict like a vulture, circling wounded prey. Her documentary had just shifted from puff piece to potential viral sensation. Danny, her camera operator, adjusted focus with the practiced precision of someone who understood that careers were made in moments like these. Webb and Rodriguez flanked their commander with visible reluctance, their discomfort growing with each word. They had seen Kellerman in actual combat, watched him lead men through hellfire with courage and tactical brilliance. This wasn't that man. This was something else, a creation of media and ego that wore their friend's face. These martial arts movies, Kellerman continued, warming to his theme, they make people think some ancient fighting technique can beat modern military training. Like meditation and inner peace matter more than conditioning and live-fire experience. The crowd was split between fascination and horror, like witnesses to a car accident unfolding in slow motion. The older veterans recognized dangerous territory when they saw it, their survival instincts honed by decades of knowing when violence was about to break containment. Margaret Kowalski made one final attempt at diplomacy. Brett, this really isn't $50,000. Kellerman's voice cut through her protest like a blade through silk. The number hung in the suddenly silent ballroom, electric with possibility and threat. 50,000 says no Hollywood wannabe can last 30 seconds with. A real operator. Put up or shut up, old man. The challenge was issued with all the ceremony of a medieval gauntlet thrown at royal feet. Cell phones rose like a forest of glass eyes, ready to capture either humiliation or vindication for viral distribution. The moment balanced on a knife's edge between spectacle and tragedy. The quiet man at the bar set down his club soda with movements that seemed to slow time itself. He adjusted his BOLO tie with the careful precision of someone preparing for ritual combat, then extended his hand with infinite calm. Steven Seagal, he said simply, and you're on. The name hit the ballroom like a physical force. Recognition rippled through the crowd in waves, whispers, gasps, the electric shock of reality colliding with expectation. This wasn't some wannabe warrior or Hollywood pretender. This was the real thing, legend made flesh. Standing calmly in their midst, Kellerman's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and finally a desperate attempt to maintain bravado in the face of cosmic-level miscalculation, the revelation of Seagal's identity transformed the ballroom into a pressure cooker of anticipation and dread. Whispers erupted like static electricity as recognition spread through the crowd in concentric circles of disbelief. Holy shit, that's actually him, breathed a Korean War veteran, his voice carrying the reverence reserved for genuine legends. Cell phones buzzed with frantic Google searches as younger attendees scrambled to understand what their elders already knew. This wasn't just some action movie star. This was a man whose real resume made his fictional exploits seem tame. Kellerman's publicist, Janet Pierce, appeared at his elbow like a guardian angel of damage control. Brett, we need to walk this back right now, she hissed through a smile frozen in place by sheer professional terror. Do you have any idea who that is? But Kellerman was trapped in the amber of his own arrogance, his entire identity constructed around being the most dangerous man in any room. Backing down now, on camera, in front of 300 witnesses, would shatter the carefully crafted image that had become more real to him than his actual military service. "Movie star doesn't impress me," he forced out, his voice carrying less conviction than a death row confession. "I deal with real threats, not choreographed fight scenes." Seagal's response came with the quiet authority of mountains and deep water. "Then let's keep this real." The crowd began migrating toward the adjoining saguaro conference room like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Hotel manager Gerald Roth appeared with the supernatural timing of hospitality professionals, his face pale but professional as he offered the space for their demonstration. Margaret Kowalski fell into step beside Seagal, her voice low and urgent. "Steven, be careful. Something's not right about his whole crew. I've been watching that documentary woman. She asks too many questions about our donors, our finances, our member lists." Seagal's nod was almost imperceptible, but those dark eyes missed nothing. Not Linda Vasquez's equipment with its subtle corporate logos. Not the way Danny positioned himself for maximum coverage. Not the nervous energy radiating from Kellerman's teammates who clearly wished they were anywhere else as they walked. Other veterans shared fragments of Seagal's real story in hushed tones. The CIA consultant who had trained counterterrorism units. The aikido master who had studied under the art's greatest practitioners. The man who had walked into darkness so others could sleep safely in the light. Kellerman stripped off his dress jacket with theatrical precision, revealing the kind of physique that graced magazine covers and recruitment posters. Every movement was calculated for maximum visual impact, but his hands shook slightly as he folded the fabric. Seagal simply removed his suit jacket, revealing a black t-shirt that emphasized the deceptive simplicity of his appearance. No flexing, no posturing, no acknowledgement of the cameras. Just a man preparing for work. The saguaro conference room transformed into a gladiatorial arena as chairs scraped against carpet and 75 spectators formed a loose circle around a 20 by 20-foot space. The elegant venue's modern art and motivational posters seemed absurdly civilized for what was about to unfold. Kellerman bounced on the balls of his feet, shadowboxing with the fluid precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours perfecting the art of violence. His teammates offered last-minute advice in military shorthand. "Keep moving. Use your reach. Don't let him get inside." Linda Vasquez positioned her cameras with documentary precision, ensuring multiple angles captured what she assumed would be either a quick victory or an embarrassing defeat for the aging action star. Danny adjusted his equipment with the hungry focus of someone who sensed career-defining footage in the making. At the circle's center, Seagal stood motionless as a mountain lake at dawn. His breathing was deep and controlled, each inhalation drawing power from sources that couldn't be measured in gyms or training facilities. His hands hung naturally at his sides, but those who knew Aikido recognized the ready position disguised as relaxation. Margaret Kowalski held a borrowed stopwatch. With visible reluctance, her nurses training screaming warnings about what she was about to witness. "Gentlemen, this is supposed to be a demonstration, not a fight to the death." 30 seconds, Kellerman announced to the crowd, his voice carrying forced confidence. "That's all I need to prove that real combat beats movie magic." The circle fell silent except for the whisper of climate control and the electronic hum of recording devices. Cell phones rose like a forest of glass eyes, ready to capture either vindication or humiliation for viral immortality. "Begin," Margaret whispered, and hell broke loose in business casual. Kellerman launched forward with the explosive speed that had made him legendary among his peers, his right hand cutting through air in a combination that should have ended the confrontation before it truly began. The punch carried enough force to shatter concrete. Guided by a lifetime of training and the desperate need to prove his superiority. But Seagal wasn't there to eye in one fluid motion that seemed to bend the laws of physics. He stepped inside Kellerman's attack using Irimi, the Aikido principle of entering. His hands moved like water flowing around stone, redirecting the seal's momentum with a simple Tai no Henko movement that sent Kellerman stumbling past his intended target. The crowd gasped as the young warrior recovered his balance, confusion replacing confidence in his blue eyes. He had thrown everything behind that initial assault, the kind of attack that had ended fights in training halls and real-world encounters. Yet somehow, the older man hadn't moved from his original position. 25 seconds, Margaret announced, her voice tight with tension. Kellerman's second attack came with even more desperation than skill. Kellerman unleashed his full arsenal with the fury of a man watching his entire identity crumble in real time. Kicks, punches, and grappling attempts flowed in combinations that would have overwhelmed any conventional opponent, each technique honed through years of SEAL training and live combat experience. But conventional physics seemed suspended in Seagal's presence. Every attack became a dance partner in a choreography of redirection and control. A vicious right cross was guided harmlessly past its target with Tenkan, the turning movement that made opponents defeat themselves. A knee strike intended to shatter ribs found only empty air as Seagal flowed like smoke around the assault. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their invincible SEAL hero was systematically dismantled by an older man who barely seemed to be trying. Each of Kellerman's attacks was met not with counterviolence, but with perfect technique that transformed aggression into elegant throws and joint controls. Webb and Rodriguez shouted increasingly desperate advice. Stay mobile. Use your reach. Don't get caught. But their words fell on deaf ears as Kellerman became trapped in the nightmare of fighting someone who existed outside the rules of engagement. He understood. Seagal's movements were pure water, flowing, inevitable, using minimal effort for maximum effect. When Kellerman attempted a takedown, he found himself guided into a perfect Irimi Nage throw that sent him rolling across carpet. When he tried to establish distance, Okuriashi brought Seagal inside his guard like a shadow made solid. 15 seconds, Margaret announced, her voice barely audible above the crowd's collective held breath. Linda Vasquez's cameras captured every moment, but her expression had shifted from documentary detachment to something approaching awe. This wasn't the choreographed action of Hollywood. This was martial artistry at its purest, violence transformed into something approaching beauty. Kellerman's technique began deteriorating as frustration overwhelmed training. His punches became wild haymakers. His kicks telegraphed desperate attempts to land anything significant. Sweat poured down his face despite the air conditioning, his breathing ragged from exertion that seemed to have no effect on his opponent. 10 seconds, Margaret whispered. With 5 seconds remaining on the stopwatch, Kellerman made his final, desperate charge. Everything he had left, pride, strength, reputation, went into a tackle that should have driven them both to the ground. Where his size and training might matter, Seagal's response was pure aikido perfection. He stepped inside the attack with supernatural timing, his left hand applying a lightning-fast nerve strike to Kellerman's neck that momentarily disrupted blood flow to the brain. As the SEAL's consciousness wavered, Seagal's right hand guided him into an Irimi Nage throw that sent him sailing through the air with the grace of a guided missile. Kellerman crashed into a stack of folding chairs with a sound like thunder, metal and plastic exploding around his unconscious form. Margaret's stopwatch read exactly 30 seconds as the young warrior lay motionless among the debris of his shattered arrogance. The promised brutal knockout had been delivered with surgical precision. The silence that followed Kellerman's thunderous impact stretched like a held breath across the conference room. 75 witnesses stood frozen in the aftermath of violence that had redefined their understanding of what was possible. Kellerman stirred after 2 minutes that felt like hours, helped to his feet by Webb and Rodriguez with the careful attention reserved for the newly humbled. His blue eyes held confusion and something approaching respect as he accepted the reality of his defeat. True to his military word, he wrote the $50,000 check with hands that trembled from more than physical exertion. His signature was barely legible, but the amount was clear. Payment for a lesson in humility that no amount of money could truly purchase. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and cell phone footage destined for viral immortality, Seagal's trained senses detected an anomaly that chilled his blood. Linda Vasquez's documentary equipment bore subtle logos he recognized from his CIA days. Titan Defense Solutions, a private military contractor with connections that reached into shadows most people never imagined existed. Her questions to departing spectators weren't about the fight itself, but about their military backgrounds, current financial situations, and contact information. She was harvesting intelligence with the practiced efficiency of a professional operative, transforming a charity gala into a recruitment fair. Margaret Kowalski approached as they returned to the ballroom, her face pale with a revelation that explained everything and promised worse to come. "Steven, I need to tell you something that's been keeping me awake for weeks." They found a quiet corner away from the lingering crowd, Margaret's voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of graveyards. "This is the fourth charity event in 6 months where something like this has happened. The other three organizers, Patricia Henderson in Denver, Robert Martinez in Atlanta, and James Crawford in Seattle, they all died in accidents within weeks of their events." The pattern was becoming clear with the terrible logic of a conspiracy crafted by professionals. Each one received large anonymous donations beforehand, just like ours. Each one had mysterious documentary crews asking the same kinds of questions. Each one had some kind of confrontation that identified potential targets. Seagal's warrior instincts, honed by decades in the world's darkest corners, crystallized around a truth that made tonight's humiliation of Kellerman seem like child's play. This wasn't random arrogance or documentary filmmaking. This was reconnaissance. The real war was just beginning, and the enemy had been watching them all along. Dawn painted Phoenix in shades of amber and gold as Seagal sat in lotus position on his hotel room's small balcony, the meditation complete, but his mind razor-sharp with purpose. The previous night's confrontation had been theater. This morning's work would determine whether the play ended in tragedy or justice. His secure satellite phone, a relic from CIA days that still carried the weight of old friendships and older debts, connected him to networks that existed in the spaces between official channels. The voice that answered belonged to Jacob Morrison, a current company operative who had learned his trade in the same shadows that had shaped Seagal's understanding of how the world really worked. "Titan Defense Solutions," Seagal said without preamble, knowing that Morrison would understand both the urgency and the implications. "I need everything: financials, personnel, operational history, and current contracts." The data that flowed back painted a picture more disturbing than simple corruption. Titan wasn't just another private military contractor competing for Pentagon dollars. They were systematically infiltrating veteran organizations nationwide, creating a recruitment pipeline that fed directly into off-books operations in conflict zones where American involvement could be plausibly denied. The charity events weren't random targets. They were talent scouts. Each gathering provided access to detailed psychological profiles of former Special Forces operators, their financial situations, family circumstances, and psychological vulnerabilities. Men broken by war and abandoned by bureaucracy were being harvested like crops, their pain transformed into profit for shadow warriors who had never worn a uniform that mattered. Margaret's revelation about the accidents fit the pattern perfectly. Patricia Henderson in Denver had discovered unauthorized access to her donor database. Robert Martinez in Atlanta had questioned why his charity's finances were being audited by a private firm. James Crawford in Seattle had refused to provide member contact information to researchers studying veteran employment patterns. All three had died within weeks: a car accident, a home invasion, a hiking mishap. Each tragedy perfectly explainable. Each investigation concluded without suspicious findings. Each death eliminating someone who had gotten too close to the truth. Seagal's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Margaret Kowalski's voice carried the strain of someone who had spent the night staring at shadows and seeing enemies in every corner. "Steven, Beverly found something in our donation records." Cross-referencing with Patricia's group in Denver, the same anonymous LLC funded both events. "And Steven," her pause carried the weight of someone about to step off a cliff. "There's a recruitment seminar today at the Marriott. Financial planning for veterans. I think you should see this." Seagal checked his Sig Sauer P226, the familiar weight of the weapon as comforting as an old friend's handshake. The holster settled against his ribs with practiced ease, hidden beneath his jacket like a deadly secret. The Phoenix Marriott's lobby buzzed with the controlled energy of business travelers and conference attendees, but Seagal's trained eye immediately identified the anomaly sitting in a corner booth like a man awaiting execution. Brett Kellerman looked as if he had aged a decade overnight. his golden boy confidence replaced by the hollow stare of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered by 30 seconds of brutal education. Mr. Seagal. Kellerman rose with visible effort, his military bearing intact but stripped of its previous arrogance. I need to talk to you. After last night, I did some checking on Linda Vasquez. She's not who she claims to be. They settled into the booth's vinyl embrace as Kellerman's story unfolded with the methodical precision of a military briefing. The documentary had been commissioned 6 months earlier by a private investor group interested in showcasing modern military heroes for a streaming platform that existed only on paper. Linda's credentials were perfect, too perfect, crafted with the kind of attention to detail that suggested professional intelligence work. Webb and Rodriguez started asking questions after the fight. Kellerman continued, his voice carrying the shame of someone who had been played by experts. Turns out they were approached 3 months ago about lucrative private contractor opportunities in Africa. Training local forces, they said. High pay, short deployments. Chance to use their skills for something that mattered. The recruitment pitch was sophisticated psychological manipulation disguised as patriotic opportunity. Veterans struggling with civilian employment, haunted by the purposelessness of peace, were being offered a chance to matter again. The money was real, the missions presented as noble, the psychological hooks perfectly calibrated to exploit the specific vulnerabilities of men trained for war but abandoned by peace. I think they've been watching me for months, Kellerman admitted, his blue eyes reflecting the kind of paranoia that came from realizing you were prey instead of predator. Every interview, every public appearance, every social media post, they were building a profile, figuring out how to use me. Before Seagal could respond, Linda Vasquez herself approached their table with movements that carried none of yesterday's documentary filmmaker casualness. Her camera was gone, replaced by the sharp alertness of someone operating under deep cover who had just blown their own mission. "Thank God you're both here," she said, sliding into the booth with practiced tradecraft that spoke of intelligence. Training. I'm not who you think I am. I'm an investigative journalist trying to expose Titan from the inside. They've been building a private army of disillusioned veterans, and they're about to make their biggest move. She slid a flash drive across the table's surface like a dealer dispensing cards in a game where the stakes were measured in lives. Everything's on there. Financial records, recruitment protocols, operational plans, body counts. But we have maybe an hour before they realize I've gone rogue. The drive felt heavier than its physical weight suggested, loaded with the kind of truth that started wars and ended careers. Seagal's hotel room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. 3 laptops displaying the contents of Linda's flash drive, while secure communications equipment established encrypted connections to allies who existed in the gray spaces between official channels. The scope of Titan's operation emerged like a cancer revealed by X-rays. Vast, metastatic, and infinitely more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Phoenix Rising, Linda explained, her fingers dancing across keyboards with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years navigating digital shadows. It's their code name for a nationwide network of veteran charity organizations being co-opted for recruitment purposes. They've identified over 2,000 former Special Forces operators through charity databases, psychological profiles built from social media activity, and direct observation at events like last night's gala. The pattern was sickeningly elegant. Anonymous donations to struggling veteran organizations created dependency relationships that could be exploited for access. Documentary crews and researchers gathered intelligence under the guise of academic study or media coverage. Confrontations like Kellerman's challenge identified psychological profiles, who could be manipulated through pride, who was desperate enough to accept any offer, who posed potential threats to the operation. Margaret Kowalski arrived with Beverly, and additional evidence that painted the conspiracy in even darker shades. Financial records showed identical anonymous donations to dozens of veteran organizations across the country, each followed by recruitment seminars disguised as job fairs, financial planning workshops, or networking events. Over 300 veterans have already been recruited, Margaret reported, her voice carrying the professional detachment of a nurse delivering terminal diagnoses. They're being sent to training camps in Virginia, then deployed to conflict zones in Africa and South America. The operations are off books, funded by corporate interests that need plausible deniability for resource extraction and political manipulation. Linda's investigation had penetrated deeper than surface recruitment. Titan wasn't just hiring mercenaries, they were manufacturing desperation to make recruitment easier. Veterans who refused initial offers found themselves facing unexpected financial crises, job losses, family problems that could be traced back to Titan's network of influence. Those who persisted in refusing were eliminated through accidents that removed obstacles while sending messages to potential whistleblowers. The immediate threat is tonight, Linda revealed, her face pale with the weight of what she was about to expose. There's a major recruitment event at the downtown convention center disguised as a veteran success summit. If we don't stop it, they'll activate their entire network for something called Operation Lazarus. Beverly spread printouts across the coffee table like tarot cards predicting doom. Transportation arrangements for over 400 veterans from across the Southwest. Hotel reservations under corporate names that traced back to shell companies. Catering contracts for an event that would last 3 days, but was only publicly scheduled for 1 evening. They're not just recruiting anymore, Seagal concluded, his voice carrying the cold certainty of someone who had seen such operations from the planning stages. They're mobilizing. Whatever Lazarus is, it requires immediate activation of assets they've been cultivating for years. The war was no longer coming. It was here, and the first battle would be fought in a convention center surrounded by civilians who had no idea they were about to become collateral damage in a conflict that officially didn't exist. The Phoenix Convention Center at twilight resembled a fortress more than a venue for veteran outreach, its glass and steel architecture transformed by Titan's security preparations into something that raised every alarm bell in Seagal's threat assessment matrix. Professional operatives in business casual positioned themselves at strategic points with the careful spacing of people who understood fields of fire and escape routes. Seagal's infiltration identity was masterfully crafted. Master Sergeant William Buck Harrison, Special Forces veteran with multiple deployments and a carefully documented descent into financial desperation and alcohol abuse. Linda's forged documents were perfect enough to pass digital verification, complete with service records that painted him as exactly the kind of broken warrior Titan preferred to recruit. The main hall held 400 veterans, their faces reflecting the hollow exhaustion of men who had given everything for a country that seemed to have forgotten them. The demographic targeting was surgical in its precision. Special operations veterans between 30 and 50, recently divorced or widowed, struggling with civilian employment, carrying debt loads that made survival a daily challenge. Colonel Raymond Voss took the stage with the bearing of a man who had earned every scar and gray hair through legitimate service before choosing a darker path. His presentation began with brotherhood and shared trauma, acknowledging the unique burden of warriors forced to navigate a civilian world that could never understand what they had experienced. "You answered your country's call," Voss declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men through hellfire. "You sacrificed everything, youth, innocence, pieces of your soul, for people who sleep safely because of your nightmares. And how were you rewarded? Bureaucratic indifference, corporate exploitation, a society that thanks you for your service while ensuring you can't afford the rent." The psychological manipulation was expertly crafted, each word designed to resonate with the specific pain points Titan had identified through months of intelligence gathering. These men weren't being recruited. They were being validated, their anger and disappointment transformed into weapons that could be wielded for Titan's purposes. During the break, Seagal used lockpicks that had opened doors in a dozen countries to access Titan's staging area behind the main auditorium. What he found there confirmed his worst fears. Detailed psychological profiles on every attendee, recruitment quotas broken down by skill specialization, and transportation manifests for immediate deployment to training facilities. But the documents that made his blood run cold detailed Operation Lazarus itself, a false flag terrorist attack on a veterans hospital in Phoenix, designed to create the chaos and anti-government sentiment necessary for Titan's final recruitment surge. The attack would be blamed on domestic extremists, generating the public outrage needed to justify private military solutions to veteran care. His infiltration was blown when a Titan operative with facial recognition software identified him from CIA surveillance footage taken years earlier in Afghanistan. The alarm that pierced the convention center's controlled atmosphere wasn't a fire drill. It was a kill order transmitted to every operative in the building. Seagal drew his Sig Sauer as armed men converged on his position, the familiar weight of the weapon steady in his hands as he crashed through a window into the Phoenix night. The chase that followed would transform the city's urban landscape into a battlefield where aikido principles met modern warfare, and the stakes were measured in hundreds of innocent lives. Behind him, the recruitment continued as if nothing had happened, for 100 veterans being processed for a war they didn't know they were joining. The parking garage's concrete maze became a vertical dojo as Seagal flowed through shadows with the fluid grace of water finding its own level. Behind him, the tactical footsteps of Titan operatives echoed like gunshots in the enclosed space, their military precision no match for his supernatural awareness of angles and distance. The first operative rounded the corner with textbook urban warfare technique, weapon low and ready, body armor gleaming under fluorescent lights, earpiece crackling with coordinates and kill orders. But textbook tactics meant predictable movement patterns, and predictability was death when facing someone who had spent decades turning conventional wisdom into funeral arrangements. Seagal's irimi was perfect, stepping inside the man's guard. As the rifle swung toward target acquisition, redirecting the weapon's barrel into a concrete pillar with bone-crushing force. The operative's trigger finger broke against steel and stone while his weapon discharged harmlessly into ceiling tiles, the muzzle flash illuminating a face twisted by pain and confusion. But a second attacker emerged from behind an SUV, the tactical knife in his hand gleaming with professional competence. He moved like special forces, controlled aggression, multiple attack vectors, the kind of blade work that had ended lives in places that didn't exist on official maps. But Aikido transformed every attack into an opportunity, every thrust into a gift of momentum that could be redirected and amplified. Tinkan, the turning movement that made opponents defeat themselves. Seagal's pivot guided the knife thrust past its intended target while his hands found the attacker's wrist and elbow. The throw that followed sent the operative sailing into a parked car with enough force to spider the windshield and trigger the alarm system. The third man tried to maintain distance, his sidearm tracking Seagal's movement with the steady hands of someone who had made difficult shots under impossible conditions. But distance was an illusion when facing someone who could read intentions in muscle tension and breath patterns. The gunshot that should have ended everything instead shattered a side mirror as Seagal flowed around the bullet's path like smoke avoiding flame. Environmental Aikido turned the parking garage into a weapon. A fire extinguisher became a projectile that struck with the force of a sledgehammer. Concrete barriers channeled movement into kill zones where superior numbers became liabilities. Car alarms provided auditory camouflage, while emergency lighting cast shadows that made tracking impossible. But more operatives were coming, their radio chatter coordinating a net that would eventually overwhelm even perfect technique. Seagal's escape route led through a construction zone where Phoenix's endless growth provided new opportunities for environmental combat. Steel girders and concrete forms became obstacles that favored experience over youth, wisdom over aggression. The chase continued through urban terrain that transformed every street corner into a potential ambush, every alley into a tactical corridor. Seagal's movements were economical, purposeful, drawing his pursuers away from civilian areas while leading them toward a destination where the real war could begin. The abandoned warehouse district provided the kind of operational security that intelligence professionals valued above real estate prices. Seagal's predetermined rally point occupied a building that had once manufactured aircraft parts for World War II bombers, its cavernous interior now housing the electronic surveillance equipment that Linda Vasquez had assembled with the careful precision of someone who understood that information was the most powerful weapon. Kellerman paced the concrete floor with the nervous energy of a caged predator, his SEAL training warring with the civilian clothes that made him feel exposed and vulnerable. The transformation from media darling to underground operative had been jarring, but the mission clarity was something he recognized and welcomed after months of manufactured celebrity. Your extraction was successful, Linda reported as Seagal emerged from the shadows like materialized darkness. But they know you penetrated the operation. Colonel Voss has accelerated the timeline for Operation Lazarus. The intelligence spread across makeshift tables painted a picture more terrifying than simple terrorism. Titan's plan was sophisticated, psychological warfare designed to create maximum chaos while maintaining plausible deniability. The attack on Phoenix Veterans Hospital would be blamed on domestic extremists, generating public outrage that would justify privatization of veteran care services. He's not just recruiting soldiers, Linda explained, her fingers dancing across keyboards that connected to networks spanning continents. He's manufacturing the crises that make recruitment necessary. Every terrorist attack, every veterans scandal, every budget cut that forces hospitals to close, they all benefit Titan's business model. Colonel Raymond Voss's psychological profile emerged from classified files that Linda had accessed through channels that officially didn't exist. Career Army intelligence officer with multiple combat deployments and a record of tactical brilliance corrupted by bureaucratic betrayal. He had lost an entire unit to political interference during the Afghanistan withdrawal. Good soldiers abandoned by decision-makers who valued optics over operations. His transformation from protector to predator followed a path that Seagal recognized from his own dark moments. The realization that the system they had served was fundamentally broken, that the politicians who sent warriors to die had never risked anything themselves, that the veterans they claimed to honor were disposable assets in games played by people who would never understand the cost of their decisions. The difference between us and him, Seagal observed, studying reconnaissance photos of Titan's command structure, is that our pain made us want to protect others. His pain made him want to exploit theirs. Kellerman stopped pacing, his military mind processing tactical implications with the speed that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. The hospital attack is scheduled for tomorrow night during the shift change. Minimal security, maximum casualties, perfect media coverage. How many people are we talking about? Beverly's research had identified the target with heartbreaking precision. Phoenix Veterans Hospital housed over 200 patients in its residential care facility. Elderly veterans with nowhere else to go, younger soldiers recovering from wounds that would never fully heal, men and women whose service had earned them the right to die with dignity instead of being sacrificed for someone else's profit margins. We can't stop this through official channels, Linda admitted, her journalist's instincts warring with operational necessity. Titan has people inside federal agencies, local law enforcement, hospital administration. By the time we convince anyone in authority, the bombs will already be in place. The weight of unofficial action settled over them like smoke from a distant fire. They were about to cross lines that separated law enforcement from vigilantism, justice from revenge, protection from warfare. But sometimes the system's failure demanded that good people act outside its constraints to preserve what it was supposed to protect. The Bellagio's penthouse suite had been transformed into a command center that rivaled military installations. Its panoramic views of the Las Vegas Strip providing both surveillance opportunities and tactical awareness that Colonel Voss valued above the suite's luxury appointments. Maps covered every available surface. Computer terminals hummed with encrypted communications, and armed operatives maintained perimeter security with the professional competence of people who understood that wars were won through preparation rather than courage. Seagal's team had walked into a trap so perfectly constructed that even their paranoia hadn't been sufficient protection. The elevator that carried them to the 30th floor was operated by Titan personnel. The hallways were monitored by facial recognition software, and every route of escape had been anticipated and covered by overlapping fields of fire. Kellerman's recognition by hotel security, actually Titan operatives in borrowed uniforms, had been inevitable from the moment they entered the building. His documented cooperation with Seagal's investigation had been carefully orchestrated theater designed to draw all potential threats into a single location where they could be eliminated simultaneously. The penthouse doors opened to reveal Margaret Kowalski bound to a chair in the center of the room, her face bloodied but her eyes still carrying the defiant fire of someone who had spent decades fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Bruises marked her arms and face. but her spine remained straight with the kind of courage that had carried her through field hospitals in Vietnam. Colonel Voss greeted them with military courtesy that somehow made the situation more terrifying than open hostility. He was everything Seagal had expected, gray-haired, scarred, radiating the dangerous competence of a career soldier whose moral compass had been shattered by betrayal and loss. His dress uniform bore decorations that spoke of legitimate heroism corrupted by legitimate grievance. "Gentlemen, welcome to your final recruitment interview," Voss said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. "I trust your journey here was educational." But the devastating revelation came from Linda Vasquez as she removed a concealed earpiece and addressed Voss with the familiarity of long association. "Colonel, the assets are in position. Mr. Seagal's CIA network has been neutralized, and federal response teams have been redirected to a training exercise in Nevada." The transformation was seamless and terrifying. The investigative journalist who had risked everything to expose Titan's conspiracy was revealed as a deep-cover operative whose entire identity had been constructed to penetrate potential threats to the organization. Her documentary equipment, her intelligence files, her dramatic confession in the hotel room, all had been theater designed to identify and eliminate everyone who posed a danger to Operation Lazarus. "Ms. Vasquez has been with us for 3 years," Voss explained with the pride of someone discussing a particularly successful operation. "Her journalism credentials are genuine, acquired during her previous assignment infiltrating environmental groups that were interfering with our clients' resource extraction operations in South America." Kellerman's face cycled through confusion, rage, and finally the hollow realization that he had been played by professionals whose manipulation had begun months before their first meeting. His teammates, his media interviews, his entire public persona had been carefully crafted to serve Titan's recruitment goals while identifying potential threats like Seagal. The trap was perfect, the manipulation complete, and the stakes were about to become infinitely higher as Voss revealed the true scope of Operation Lazarus. The penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of Las Vegas that sparkled like scattered diamonds, but Voss's attention was focused on the tablets and monitors that displayed real-time intelligence from operations spanning multiple continents. This wasn't just about Phoenix Veterans Hospital or even Titan's domestic recruitment. This was about redefining how America projected power in a world where official military action carried unacceptable political costs. Operation Lazarus isn't just one attack, Voss explained with the patient thoroughness of someone conducting a military briefing. It's a coordinated campaign designed to create the chaos necessary for private military solutions to replace failed government institutions. Phoenix is simply the opening move in a larger strategy. The scope was breathtaking in its ambition and terrifying in its implications. Simultaneous attacks on veteran facilities in 6 major cities, each blamed on different domestic extremist groups to maximize political fragmentation and social division. The resulting outrage would justify privatization of veteran care, homeland security, and eventually military operations themselves. "Your country abandoned you, and every warrior who served with honor," Voss continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction corrupted by justified anger. "Politicians who never wore a uniform send soldiers to die for causes they abandon the moment public opinion shifts. We're offering something better, a way for warriors to serve causes that matter, protecting interests that value their sacrifice." Margaret Kowalski's voice cut through the speech with the moral clarity of someone who had spent decades healing the wounds that were inflicted on good people. "You're not offering them purpose, Raymond. You're exploiting their pain for profit." Voss's response carried the heat of personal trauma translated into ideological justification. "I watched an entire unit die because some State Department bureaucrat decided that extracting our local allies would send the wrong political message. Good soldiers, men with families, abandoned by people who measure courage in poll numbers and political donations." The devil's bargain he offered was sophisticated in its appeal to both practical necessity and emotional need. Seagal would become Titan's training consultant, his reputation and skills legitimizing their operations while recruiting higher-caliber operatives. In exchange, Margaret would live, the hospital attack would be canceled, and the veterans currently being processed for deployment would be offered genuine employment instead of manipulation. You can join us, Voss concluded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who believed his own moral justifications. Or watch everything you've tried to protect Byrne. The choice is yours, but the timeline isn't. Operation Lazarus begins in 6 hours whether you're with us or not. Seagal's response came after a pause that seemed to stretch across decades of violence and decades of seeking peace beyond it. His dark eyes reflected calculations that encompassed not just the immediate tactical situation, but the larger war between those who protected and those who exploited. "I accept your terms, Colonel," he said finally, his voice carrying resignation that sounded genuine to everyone except Margaret Kowalski, who caught something in his eyes, a flicker that told her his acceptance was merely the opening move in. A game whose rules Voss didn't fully understand. "But I want guarantees. Written contracts, proof the hospital attack is canceled, and Margaret's immediate release." Voss smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had broken a legendary warrior through superior strategy and overwhelming force. "You'll have everything you want, Seagal. Welcome to the winning side." As he moved to shake hands, Margaret noted Seagal's positioning. Weight balanced, breathing controlled, hand position suggesting readiness for violence that could explode. From apparent submission in the space between heartbeats, the real battle was about to begin. And the stakes were measured in everything that separated civilization from the chaos that wolves like Voss would create in the absence of sheepdogs willing to stand against them. Voss led Seagal to a computer terminal against the penthouse's eastern wall, digital contracts glowing on multiple monitors. As Seagal's fingers moved across the keyboard with apparent compliance, uploading signatures and verification data, a CIA-crafted virus propagated through Titan's network like digital wildfire. The malware was elegant, designed to copy and transmit every file to federal servers through encrypted channels activated by specific keystrokes. Financial records, operational plans, compromising communications, everything was being packaged for delivery to authorities who could act without legal challenges. Simultaneously, Jacob Morrison's federal response teams were repositioning from Nevada to Phoenix staging areas. The training exercise redirect Linda claimed credit for was actually Seagal's insurance policy, old favors bearing fruit. But Operation Lazarus was happening now. Explosive charges were being positioned at Phoenix Veterans Hospital, detonation scheduled in 4 hours during shift change for maximum casualties and media coverage. Linda Vasquez noticed his unusual focus on classified files. "Colonel, he's downloading our database," she called out. Recognizing data extraction, Voss's realization was instantaneous. "You never intended to join us." Seagal's response carried Winter's finality. "I never negotiate with terrorists." The penthouse erupted as Seagal overturned the conference table, his Sig Sauer appearing with supernatural speed. Muzzle flashes lit the Las Vegas skyline as the final battle began. Fire suppression transformed the penthouse into artificial rain and chaos, as Kellerman used the confusion to escape. The ceramic knife hidden in his boot, missed by security, focused on metal detectors, sliced through restraints with whisper-quiet efficiency. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as sprinklers drenched expensive furnishings. Kellerman's SEAL training translated luxury environment into tactical terrain, every doorway a fatal funnel to exploit or avoid. His first target was a Titan operative near the elevator. Attention focused on containing Seagal rather than monitoring supposedly secured prisoners. Kellerman's approach was pure stealth, controlled breathing, silent footsteps, blade work that ended lives without sound. The second operative guarding Margaret died just as quietly. Kellerman's knife finding the precise spot between vertebrae that severed spinal cord without vocal reaction. Margaret's restraints parted under careful blade work, but her injuries were severe. Bruised ribs suggesting internal damage, left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. "Can you hold a weapon?" Kellerman whispered, pressing a captured sidearm into her uninjured hand. Her response carried steely determination. "I've been shooting since before you were born, son." Kellerman activated a captured radio, using Titan's communication network to provide intelligence while establishing defensive perimeter around Margaret's position. Finally finding genuine purpose beyond manufactured celebrity, the penthouse became A three-dimensional battlefield where luxury transformed into weapons in Seagal's environmental aikido. Marble tables, crystal fixtures, steel, and glass. Everything was incorporated into a fighting style that turned opponents' aggression into self-destruction. A charging operative found his momentum redirected into wall-mounted art with enough force to shatter both sculpture and confidence. The Irimi movement was perfectly timed, Seagal's hands barely touching before physics completed the technique. Another attacker discovered expensive marble could conduct electricity when Seagal guided his weapon hand into a damaged light fixture. The resulting shock dropping him unconscious to water-soaked carpet. The wet floor became an asset as Seagal's movements flowed like water finding its level, his balance perfect while adversaries slipped on treacherous surfaces. Each takedown demonstrated different Aikido principles. Tenkan turns making attackers dizzy, Irimi entries placing him inside defenses, but ammunition was becoming a concern as muzzle flashes lit the penthouse like deadly fireworks. Systematic reduction of Titan's forces from 12 to 4 had been accomplished through perfect technique, but the final confrontation would require more than martial arts mastery. Colonel Voss emerged from cover with two operatives flanking him, their movement patterns speaking of special forces training that couldn't be dismissed through technique alone. Enough games, Seagal. Time for professionals to handle this. The Voss-Seagal confrontation transcended physical combat, becoming philosophical debate conducted with bullets and blade work, each exchange representing competing visions of warrior purpose in a world that had forgotten the difference between service and exploitation. Voss moved with controlled efficiency that had made him legendary, tactical fire and movement, precise weapon transitions speaking of thousands of training hours. His shots forced Seagal into defensive positioning while remaining operatives. Attempted crossfire, but Seagal's Aikido had evolved beyond traditional limitations into urban warfare, incorporating spiritual principles, turning the penthouse into an extension of his body. Metal fixtures deflected gunfire harmlessly, overturned furniture channeled movement into kill zones. These veterans were discarded by a government that used them up. Voss shouted between gunfire exchanges, voice carrying passionate conviction, rooted in legitimate tragedy. I'm giving them purpose, income, respect. Seagal's response came while deflecting a knife thrust with bronze sculpture. You're exploiting their pain for profit. The philosophical battle intensified physical conflict as Voss revealed trauma depth. Friends killed by bureaucratic incompetence, soldiers abandoned by politicians measuring courage in poll numbers. Your pain doesn't justify theirs, Seagal replied, voice carrying weight of someone who'd walked similar darkness but emerged with different conclusions. That a knife thrust opened a gash along Seagal's ribs, proving even legends could bleed when facing opponents forged in identical fires. The earpiece crackled with crisis intelligence as Jacob Morrison's voice delivered devastating news. Steven, the hospital attack is live. 3 operatives disguised as medical personnel have taken hostages in the veterans' wing. Explosive charges are armed with dead man's switch active. Seagal's split focus between immediate combat and coordinating federal response created vulnerability that Voss exploited with ruthless precision. The knife thrust carried enough force to penetrate body armor, guided by muscle memory from decades of legitimate service corrupted by grievance. The blade found flesh along Seagal's ribs, sending blood streaming while proving legends could bleed facing opponents forged in identical fires. Pain was information, injury was disadvantage. But mission continuation meant innocent veterans wouldn't die for profit margins. Federal teams are moving on the hospital, Seagal reported through gritted teeth while engaging Voss in knife combat, transforming expensive penthouse into gladiatorial arena. But they need deactivation codes only you can provide. CIA communication protocols allowed directing federal response while fighting for his life, multitasking pushing considerable abilities to limits. Every movement served dual purposes, defensive positioning against Voss's attacks while maintaining communication discipline. The blade dance was poetry written in steel and desperation, 2 violence masters creating deadly choreography across marble floors slicked with water and blood. Meanwhile, Kellerman provided updates. Whatever you're going to do it fast. Desperation transformed Voss from controlled professional into cornered predator as federal helicopters approaching the Bellagio announced everything's collapse. His grab for Margaret Kowalski was executed with fluid precision, understanding hostages were ultimate tactical advantage against superior force. The combat knife pressed against her throat carried weight of hundreds of innocent lives, edge sharp. Enough to end existence between heartbeats while the dead man's switch clipped. To Voss's vest promised explosive vengeance, achieving Operation Lazarus through martyrdom. The heart monitor connects to charges throughout the hospital, Voss explained with calm professionalism. Kill me, and 200 veterans die in explosions blamed on domestic terrorists. Political result remains identical, private military. Solutions to failed government institutions. This moment called for Seagal's most advanced technique. Not physical aikido but spiritual essence, projecting perfect calm, overwhelming aggression through pure presence. The technique required total ego abandonment, complete universal harmony trust. Mushin, the no-mind state where action flowed from emptiness rather than intention. Seagal's breathing matched eternity's rhythm while consciousness expanded, encompassing the entire cause and effect web. The profound stillness seemed stopping time itself. Voss, conditioned responding to aggression with counteraggression, faced. Avoid his violence couldn't fill. 0.1 microsecond was enough that Seagal's movement emerged from stillness without transition, guiding knife away with gentle precision while applying nerve strike rendering. Voss unconscious without triggering involuntary contractions. The penthouse command center became a federal crime scene as agents swarmed through shattered luxury with methodical precision. Seagal's intelligence download provided everything prosecutors needed: financial records, operational plans, communication logs tracing Titan's conspiracy from legitimate grievance origins to predatory exploitation corruption. Margaret Kowalski received medical attention reserved for witnesses whose testimony would determine whether justice emerged from chaos. Her injuries were serious but not life-threatening. Bruises and fractures. Speaking of interrogation, designed breaking spirit rather than extracting information. At Phoenix Veterans Hospital. The hostage situation concluded with precise federal response, suggesting months of preparation rather than improvised crisis management. With Voss unconscious, operatives surrendered rather than face murder charges for operations already failed. Explosive charges were disarmed by technicians understanding terrorism was most effective, appearing unstoppable, but neutralized through patient professionalism, separating legitimate authority from private military chaos. Kellerman helped coordinate federal response with tactical competence, reminding everyone why he'd earned his seal, Trident, before celebrity corrupted service. Understanding. Linda Vasquez was arrested despite undercover journalism claims. Her sophisticated manipulation nearly costing lives while serving interests measuring veterans' suffering in profit margins rather than human dignity. Titan's systematic dismantling unfolded over following days, with justice's inexorable momentum applied through proper channels. 15 executives faced federal charges. Their private army scheme exposed in congressional hearings. 6 months after Operation Lazarus died in a Las Vegas penthouse, the Grand Palms Hotel Ballroom hosted another Phoenix Veterans Charity Gala. But atmosphere carried hope rather than desperate energy of people addressing insurmountable problems through individual generosity alone. Steven Seagal moved through the crowd with quiet dignity, marking previous appearances, writing generous checks and declining photo opportunities with consistency, transcending public recognition. But now Brett Kellerman worked beside him, humbled, wiser, dedicated, protecting fellow veterans through Margaret Kowalski's expanded charity network. Media attention from exposing Titan's conspiracy brought legitimate federal funding and corporate support to veteran causes nationwide, transforming Margaret's grassroots operation into a model for civilian society, honoring military service through genuine assistance rather than empty gestures. Margaret herself, recovered from injuries but bearing permanent scars, had become a national advocate for veteran welfare reform. Her congressional testimony was devastating in simplicity. The difference between organizations serving veterans versus serving themselves was measured in whether help came with hidden agendas. As the evening wound down, Kellerman approached Seagal with genuine respect. "Mr. Seagal, I wanted to thank you again for showing me what real strength looks like. Seagal adjusted his familiar BOLO tie. True strength protects the innocent, Brett. Everything else is just performance. They watched hundreds of veterans connect with legitimate support services, proving real heroes need no audience beyond those they protect. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.